Air heating, cooling, plumbing. It's time for part 2.
Welcome back, everyone, to Morning Magazine, Part 2 for this March 26th, 2021. You have your host, James J. Malouf here. We are joined right now in studio by Superintendent of Wisconsin Rapids Public Schools, Craig Broeren. Good morning, Craig.
Good morning.
Also want to say a very good morning to our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. We have Kevin here, and before we get going too far, we have to embarrass Kevin and wish him a happy birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday, Kev. Have a great birthday tomorrow. Hope it's a good one. Craig, before we get going here, just check in. How are you and yours doing? How's everybody holding up?
Doing well. Things are going really well.
Good to hear. Good to hear. We have a lot on our plate today, so I certainly want to jump right into it. And, with the referendum question for the April 6th ballot, I thought that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate the opportunity again. But we are headed into spring break, so that's one positive thing for both students and staff here and families as we end the school day today. So next week is spring break, which is another great reason why we're having this conversation this morning, James, just as a reminder that Tuesday, April 6th is going to be here before we know it, because I think a lot of people are taking advantage of the fact that there's a break in the school classes and we'll be, leaving town and doing other much more entertaining things, one would guess.
Yeah.
And anyway, so April 6th, there's two questions on the ballot. One is a levy override question for $2 million a year for 5 years, and that is almost entirely devoted towards updates in curriculum and technology district-wide. And as I have alluded to before, it is not meant to be simply standalone. So there are items that are in our regular Fund 10 that we're still going to continue to fund whether the question passes or not, although the additional dollars allow us to make the moves that we feel are absolutely necessary, rather than just focusing on the critical items as kind of a difference. So there's a number of things on the docket. You talk about textbooks and workbooks and other consumables, but there's also site licenses and subscriptions and all of these pieces that are incorporated into curriculum, in virtually every content area. In addition, the technology piece, there's hardware and software updates, Wi-Fi and infrastructure, data centers, and these things now that are kind of commonplace and status quo, in 2021. And so that's what's incorporated into that first question. And then the second question is a $34 million bond issue question. And I think it's important to emphasize that if both of these questions were to pass, our projections indicate no change in the local tax base, property taxes for the school portion of the tax levy.
That's a really key part of this, too. And because, unfortunately, when it comes to education and these sorts of things and putting money and investing money into it, because it is an investment, that word needs to be used more often, I feel, in these topics. We get people to be hesitant when it comes to taxes and that sort of thing. And it goes back to the old thing of, well, I want the pothole fixed, but I don't want to pay for it. That's not the way the world works. And these things are important. But then when you add that on top of it, that you can actually bring that to the fold, that's really a key part of this. That really is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions I think that arises from, making that statement would be, okay, how is that possible? And then are you telling me if we vote no and they fail that our taxes are going to go down? And so I can answer both of those questions. And so on the front end, much of what's making this plausible is good, sound financial planning on behalf of the district over the last many years that puts us in a position in which we're have not no debt, but pretty close to no debt for a district our size. And so it is replacing or kind of filling the gap, as it were, on a slightly lower level than what we had encumbered in the past in terms of debt and had bought down a lot of that debt, saving taxpayer dollars in terms of interest payments. But nonetheless, it is a bit of a replacement then. That's an easy way to think about it. But as a follow-up to, okay, so if they don't pass, that means my taxes will go down. And that's accurate in the short term, but it's not accurate in the long term. And the reason being is that based on the school funding formula in the state of Wisconsin, it's actually somewhat advantageous for districts similar to Wisconsin Rapids that have a certain level of state aid or state funding that they receive. Because we have about 50 to 55% of our revenue come in the form of state aid, which is taxes nonetheless, but it's statewide taxes. So it's not just local property taxes, it's taxes that put in the big pool and then crank through the DPI, the Department of Public Construction calculator to equalize and send to districts based on need and all of these other demographic sort of information. And so we get about 50 or 55% of our overall funding in that form. And then the remainder is made up in the local property tax levy. So it's because of the revenue cap, it's a fairly clear circumstance where if state aid goes down, the local tax levy goes up to make up that gap, unless there's some modification in a downward fashion of the revenue cap, and that hasn't happened historically. It did back in 10-11 with Act 10, but prior to that and since then, it's never happened in the history of the state except for that one occasion. So with that information, then I can share that clearly. If we're not making a bond payment and paying interest on a bond, as an example, in the first year that happens, you would see a decrease in the mill rate and a decrease in school property taxes. Past that, you're going to end up losing state aid because we're not spending as much as we have been or could be per pupil. And that would then impact the local levy because we would lose state aid and the levy would rise. Now, the question would be, okay, to what extent are we talking? And frankly, not knowing what the next biennial budget is, as well as what the future holds past 2 years, it's almost impossible to give you that number, but you would basically see a slight increase year over year. In the first year, it would be a decrease, and then you'd see that start to slowly creeping up over time and potentially settling at a level that we're predicting anyhow.
And we've seen that happen in other communities. We have the data already on that.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we know, kind of looking, we already have a crystal ball to kind of tell us that sort of thing. And certainly it's also noteworthy, Craig, that these are things that are going to need to be done eventually anyway. And not to say that, that's a reason to do it. But if your concern is debt or taxes or these sorts of things, well, you're just kicking the can down the road. It's going to end up having to be done. And why not help these kids get benefited from these things right away? I have to tell you, this is I went over this 5 or 6 times already, these questions and where this breaks down and everything. There's nothing on this list that doesn't seem necessary to me. Think Academy providing them with the gymnasium, and maybe right away you think of gymnasium and that doesn't seem like something that's important right away. It is. It's important for these kids to be able to have physical activities. Did anybody go to a grade school that didn't have a gym? Like even me, went to a poor school. We had a gym. I mean, these are things that kids need. These are things that kids should have. And most importantly, it shouldn't need to be brought up, but this is the future. And we want to prepare these kids to be able to run our country at the best that they can.
Absolutely. And kids are clearly, it's functional at Think Academy at Rudolph. They can have Phi-Ed. However, that gym expansion would clearly make that life a lot easier and provide a significant degree of flexibility for much more than just Phi-Ed. Additionally, it would be a very nice community amenity with regard to individuals and community groups using and being involved in that space out there in the Rudolph Vesper area. Clearly, they got to travel into town to do many different things. So it'd be nice to have a few practices and other things out there too to cater to the Rudolph area.
The other part of this too that stands out to me is wanting to enhance safety and security. And I would think that that's something that would be right at the top of people's minds any given day, whether you have kids in school or not.
Absolutely, yeah. So a significant portion of the $34 million bond issue is in updating school entrances to make them secure. And I know that we've discussed it in the past, but just in a cursory fashion, we have controlled entrances and exits. Of course, you can't just come and go as you please in school buildings. Everybody knows that. But the addition of a secured entrance, on our school has everything to do with diverting individuals to the office area only. So you're going to still ring a buzzer to get in. You come up on a video screen, and a secretary or school staff lets you in. And in many of our buildings currently, once that happens, once that front door is buzzed open, you have access to virtually anywhere that you want to go in the building. And I think Lincoln High School is the perfect example of that. You go to your right, and you're in a very large commons or cafeteria area that always has students and staff in it. You go to your left, and you're into the academic area of the building pretty quickly. You would have to go across an open area to get to the high school office, which, of course, most people do, right?
Yeah.
And they follow the rules. But nonetheless, this is kind of, with safety and security, we're always looking at things that we can do, and you control what you have control over while not, constructing a maximum security prison, of course. And this is one of those final pieces as it stands right now where In some buildings, it's easily achievable by just simply modifying, where the breezeway or where the entrance point is, maybe adding a doorway, shifting some door frames around, and it's fairly uncomplicated. In others, you're talking about building a new office area because the office is across or down a hall in order to get to it. So making those offices contiguous with the front entry, which once you get buzzed in, the only place you can go would be to the school office where you're checked in, and then of course you're released to the rest of the building.
It's another one of these things that just feels so like makes sense to me that this should be no question or anything like that. But that's something that I think is key to some of this conversation we're having today, an important part of the conversation. I talk to a lot of our listeners, survey and get their feedback and that sort of thing. And when it comes to education, or when it comes to putting money into education or anything like that, so many of them are coming from an area where we're thinking about what it was like when we were in school. And that's nobody's fault. That's the way we interpret the world in general, is through our own eyes. But so many of us think of that way. And even somebody like myself, that it wasn't that long ago that I was in high school. It was 20 years ago, so I guess it was a little while. But you don't think of things, well, it couldn't have changed that much. But even something as simple as libraries have changed quite a bit in that time period. And even in the last 5 years have changed quite a bit. So that also comes into play when we're talking about why this referendum is so important and why these details of it are so important.
Yeah, and I think the last time we talked, and I know I'm not, I wasn't born and raised here in Wisconsin Rapids, but for folks that are, Lincoln High School is, of course, the new Lincoln High School, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Lincoln High School was the one built in 1931 that was East Junior High and so forth. But the new Lincoln High School was built in 1979, which, of course, is 42 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm not a super old guy, but that is pretty close to my lifetime. I'm 47 right now. Yeah. So that just tells you that there's areas that updates to get more current with times are necessary. And you highlighted one aspect of that, James, which is the modification of the Library Media Center and shifting that to the front of the building, which accommodates the renovation of the Lincoln High School science classrooms, which are in the center of that second floor area of Lincoln. And the science classrooms, of course, were built at the same time the building was built, so they're from 1979. And in that regard, as a former science teacher myself and a bit of a science nerd, I think it's quite clear that we're not doing science the way we did in 1979 in 2021. And those updates, unfortunately, are not super cheap. No updates are cheap, clearly, but excuse me, for science in particular, but it's about the infrastructure. So that's mainly what you're looking to update. And then, of course, since you're taking a kick at that, you're going to do things that make it more beneficial for the space for both teachers, students, and other staff in expanding the size a little bit. And in doing those renovations, then it takes up the space of where our current media center is, and which is the rationale behind relocating it to the front of the building, and then in a contiguous fashion with our cafeteria and commons area, allowing for a very flexible and much more user-friendly interface for kids and, frankly, the community for various events.
One of my favorite things about going to high school at Lincoln was just walking in every day and the way it was open and the way that was. And it's really, I can picture this, and it's still like that with these changes, with that and everything. I like that flow is still there, but you have the security comfort as well for your kids. But then these kids also have this, a fun school to go into, quite honnly. I mean,
Absolutely.
It just sounds really nice the way this is laying out and everything. And I'm appreciating you being able to visualize that for us too, as well. We're going to take a really quick commercial break, but before when we come back, I'd like to get into the upgrades at the Think Academy and some of that. So we'll touch on that. And actually, Craig and I have a good story of the day that we'll wrap up on before we get out of here. And I didn't realize this, but you and I, don't tell anybody, but I'm a science nerd as well. So we might have to have a show one day where we just talk science.
That'd be awesome.
I think that'd be fun. We'll be back with more with our friend Craig Broeren, Superintendent of Wisconsin Rapids Public Schools, and our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media on More Morning Magazine coming up on AM 1320 WFHR. Not bad. Thank you, Michael. It is 28 in Stevens Point, 30 in Marshfield, 29 in Wausau, and 31 here in Wisconsin Rapids, where you have Morning Magazine. Your host, James, here. Again, we are joined by Wisconsin Rapids Public Schools Superintendent Craig Broeren and our friends from WR Community Media over there. Craig, before we went to break, we were discussing the final faculty upgrade that would occur, and that would be over at Think Academy. Can we dive into that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So you alluded to a bit of that at the front end of the conversation too, and the cafeteria. So my term is always that Think Academy Rudolph Elementary as the gymnacafnatorium. And if you see on on the slide deck and on our website, there's blueprints or layouts, not blueprints, I guess, floor plans of each of the buildings, and then what the proposed modification and their corresponding dollar amount is. And at Rudolph, you're going to see that. If you look at where an open white area is next to where this new gym is supposedly going to be located, it's quite small. And anybody that would look at that would go, okay, well, it's not even a half the size of a normal full-size gym. So that's what they're working with. That's what they're operating with out at Think. And of course, then you have to do things like lunch. And if there's any school programs, then of course there's, set up in there. So FIAD then is either displaced, moved outside if they can, so forth and so on. So really what it is then if that gym addition is accomplished, you have a devoted cafeteria area, and then you have a gym, of course, that's used as a gym would be, but also as a gathering point for, multiple grades or building-wide activities, and again, for community use.
And this is something that if when we were first talking about bringing the rafters to town or something like that, it seems well and good and everything, but then you got to figure out, well, how much is it going to cost the city? Where are they going to put them? These sorts of things, and you break it down and eventually figure out, okay, we're going to be in the black. We're going to be okay with this. When it comes to something like this, you don't always get to see the technical dollars and cents, but the investment is almost bigger than any dollars or cents we could put on it. When we're talking about kids, just looking at Think Academy alone, let alone all the other schools that this is going to affect and enhance and improve, those kids' lives are so much happier, so much better, so much. It's not as if that they can't get by. They've shown that they can, as is not right now, but they shouldn't have to. They should have these amenities. They should have these things. It's not as if we're looking to give them a swimming pool filled of champagne or something like that. Like, these are things that every kid should have.
Yeah, absolutely. And really it is about an approach that not only benefits kids, but there may be direct or indirect benefits to the community as well. And that's the foundational premise, strong schools, and that includes facilities, but strong schools build strong communities.
So well said. Incredibly good point. And another thing that I thought about going over this, and it happened the other night when I was reading it for like the third time and going over the referendum, is so many of these things, they help the kids, and that's first and foremost on all of our minds. But in a year like we've had this past year, I don't know about anybody else, but I sure have found myself appreciating teachers a lot more than I ever have, and I always have, but I have them even in higher regard. These are things that I don't want to say make their job easier, make them be able to do their job better, enhance their work, and free them up in some ways to be able to focus on other things and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So taken together, both the levy override for curriculum and technology improvements and building modifications are, there's broad and far-reaching consequences to having the ability to do these things that are certainly impactful for students, and that, of course, is our primary goal. But there is also benefits for staff and, again, the broader community. And anytime we have that capability, and planning and forethought, and I think it behooves us as members of the school district and responsible for the operation of the school to do things that enhance and modify in a positive sense opportunities for kids in the community.
Every adult has had a situation in their town, wherever you're listening to us from, where they go to the store, they look to get something or whatever, and they're frustrated because the cashier is having a hard time or something like that. And sometimes that could be from learning a job, or sometimes it could be because the education they grew up with really wasn't there. If you're looking for the return on your investment, that kind of thing is a big part of it. Kids being more educated, smarter, feeling more confident with reading and taking in knowledge and these sorts of things. The layer upon layer upon layer of investment that there is involved in this, it's just so obvious to me and clear, but certainly important that we get these details to people and let them know these things. And when it comes to this, to the referendum, is there anything we haven't touched on that you feel the audience should know about that you would like to address?
I think we covered everything. Just to remember to vote on Tuesday, April 6th.
Yeah, make sure to do that, everybody. And we'll be giving you more information about voting and such during Over the Back Fence and leading up to that. Craig, I thought that one kind of be nice to end on a fun topic here and everything. And we had some really cool news come out recently that a AWSA names Wisconsin Rapids Tina Miller, Wisconsin Elementary School Principal of the Year. Want to congratulate Miss Miller. Fantastic job by her. This is really cool news.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So we also have two Cole Leadership Award winners. That would be Kelly Schaefer, who's principal at Washington Elementary, and then Tina Miller, who's principal at Howe. Oh. And in that same phone call, Jim Lynch, the executive director of AWSA, that's the Association of Wisconsin School Administrators, had said, hey, I have some other news for you as well, and had indicated that Tina Miller would be receiving the Elementary Principal of the Year award for the state of Wisconsin. So then what we had to do was figure out how can we, keep this kind of secret and do a surprise get together. So what we ended up doing was I contacted Tina and said, hey, you've won the Cole Leadership Award. Congratulations. And the board would like to recognize you in some capacity. And so under that pretense, we coordinated in all of Howe, all students and staff, walked over, did a little walking field trip to the East Junior High Field House yesterday, where she was under the impression that she's going to be recognized for her Cole Leadership Award. Mm. And then lo and behold, there was more. And so with everybody in attendance, her mom and dad were there, her husband and her two daughters, of course, staff and other friends and family were present, along with the entirety of Howe Elementary School. And then we unveiled, much to her surprise, that she was Wisconsin Elementary Principal of the Year. It was a great program.
That's so cool. And again, going back to this, in a year like we've had, any chance we can highlight our principals, our teachers, that sort of thing, it's always well and good. But, when it's local, it feels a little more. We get some personal pride in that. And that is pretty cool. I love all of our elementary schools, but any chance to mention Washington School, my old stomping grounds, that's a fantastic thing. And actually, it kind of helps me kind of bring things all together here, too, because for me, like yourself, Craig, I didn't grow up here. I wasn't born here and everything. But this area and going to Washington School was my first chance to be a kid. Where I was coming from, you just didn't have that. We didn't even have recess, things like that. So being able to be here and having that opportunity was something that was life-changing for me. And I'm not the only one. There are so many kids out there that are like that, kids that were born and raised here, kids that are moving here and that sort of thing. And these referendum questions, they may seem like something, this isn't a presidential election, so why should I pay attention, that sort of thing. This is so vital. These, you can make an argument, are even more important than a presidential election. These are things that are affecting our daily lives and affecting our children's lives. So it's so important to be educated on these things and to be up on the information. If people want to kind of re-go over some of the things we've talked about today or look something up for themselves, how can they do that, Craig? Yeah,
so there's all kinds. There's no more public information sessions. We're through the three that we had planned. However, all of this information is available on our district website, WRPS.org. Additionally, my contact information is on that same website. For reference, the phone number is 424-6701. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. And then, of course, you feel free to email me anytime, and I can respond via email as well.
If I'm a citizen and I'm coming to you and I'm telling you that I have some issues with this, what is one thing you say to me as we're both walking out the door, just to try to get just drop a seed in my brain to let it grow, that this is important?
Yeah, well, I think it's about the data, right? So one of the roles that I have as a school superintendent is an inability to advocate for or against school referenda. And clearly you want to see success and you want your district to be, continue to be successful. But on the same hand, I'm also a facts guy. And so that role for me is not really hard. This is not my referendum, right? This is something that the school board, who's locally elected, saw fit to ask these questions because, of course, the need is there. And my goal then is just to provide information and details to the community, and that is frankly what we've done. And if through review of details you find that you're going to check yes, great. If you find that you're going to check no, that is absolutely fine with me as well. You got to make a decision and act on what's best for what you feel is best for you and your family. But my only hope would be that you do so with access to available, relevant and and decent information.
Going forward here, we couldn't have anybody better in the position, and we are so appreciative of you and your staff and what you've been doing for our kids, for our community, especially in a year like this. Kudos to all of you guys and the work that you've done. Stay safe and strong out there, and thank you so much for the time, Craig.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to birthday boy Kevin, our friends over at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. I had to get one more in there, Kevin. We appreciate you guys as well. We will have more Morning Magazine for you next week right here on AM 1320 WFHR.